introduction once we start the recording. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Congregation Agudath Sholom's Scholar in Residence event. My name is Moshe Kurtz. I work as the Assistant Rabbi at Congregation Agudath Sholom. And we are honored this morning to have the Chief Rabbi of the Union of Orthodox Synagogues of South Africa, Rabbi Dr. Chief Rabbi Goldstein. So first of all, just a thank you to Daniel Shilowitz and all of those who are on the Adult Education Committee for putting this event together. We are very honored to be hosting the Chief Rabbi this morning. A little bit about Rabbi Goldstein before we begin. Number one, I'm not sure if it makes it into the Guinness Book of World Records, but Rabbi Goldstein was appointed at the age of 32 already to the Chief Rabbinate in South Africa, a huge honor. He earned his ordination, his rabbinical ordination from Yeshiva Gedola of Johannesburg, and he additionally earned Yadin Smicha, the right to serve as a judge on a rabbinical court and to rule in monetary matters from the Eretz Chemda Institute in Israel. Further, he holds a PhD in human rights and constitutional law, and it's been a big part of his career fusing the Torah world and his ability to interact with different faiths and different beliefs and different demographics within South African society. Also, he comes from a line of different rabbis in South Africa. We don't always have the privilege to hear Torah coming out from South Africa. The last time I did was from Rav Moshe Sternbach, but she had a short stint in South Africa. But we are honored to hear from the Chief Rabbi this morning. And what we'll be doing, just a quick logistical point before he begins his speech, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Well, God willing, we'll have a quick Q&A at the end, maybe 1 to 2 questions. So if you have any questions, look in the chat. My email address will be there, and you can email me any questions. I'll monitor them during the class. Again, it is a huge honor for us to be hosting you, Rabbi Goldstein. Thank you for spending the time with Agudath Sholom this morning, and we look forward to hearing your words of Torah.
Thank you so much for such a warm and generous introduction, which I appreciate very much. Thank you for the honor of being able to address this gathering, and thank you everyone for your attendance and your interest. What I wanted to talk about today is really in preparation for Yamim Noraim, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is a time to reflect on who we are and really to reflect on what we should be aiming to strive for, which in a certain sense sounds obvious. You know, we have the mitzvahs which are laid out, and that's something we need to keep. We need to keep the mitzvahs, but it's something which goes deeper, because what is really the purpose of the mitzvahs, which sounds like an audacious question. Or let's frame that question in another way. What is the essence, if we were to distill the essence of what the Torah is all about? Could it be distilled into a single concept? And of course, even such a discussion is it's obviously a space for speculation and discussion about what it could be distilled to. And what I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts based on the philosophy of mitzvahs of the Ramban, Rav Moshe ben Nachman. Because Rav Moshe ben Nachman came with a philosophy which he based on the Midrash, and of course on Divrei Chazal, but it gives us a completely different vantage point into understanding the role of the mitzvahs. Because what is the role of the mitzvahs? And let's launch our discussion from a mitzvah which is a well-known mitzvah, which the Ramban gives a very important and fundamental understanding of, which actually helps us to grasp the essence of what it is. And that is, of course, the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein, of sending away the mother bird. The Torah says, which we just actually learned in this week's parsha, Kiseitze, the mitzvah that if you come to a nest of a bird and there are eggs or young chicks that you want to take, you need to send the mother bird away before you do that. And we read about that in last week's parsha. Now, in the parsha we read yesterday. Now the question is the rationale or the philosophy behind this mitzvah. And there's a big debate as to what it is. And the Gemara actually says, the Mishnah in Brachos, that one should not say it's because of Hashem's compassion on the mother bird, because what about all of the other creatures? Why specifically on the birds? So, and how can we attribute that as the primary motivation behind this? The Ramban uses this discussion of the Gemara, and he engages with the Rambam on this point, and he comes out with an entirely fundamental, comprehensive philosophy of all of the mitzvahs, which I believe that if we internalize this philosophy, can really change the way that we look at everything. The Ramban says this: the purpose of the mitzvah Shiluach HaKain is not about the compassion towards the mother bird, because that Hashem, He's in charge of that, and He can make sure that the animals and human beings are treated the way that they need to be. But what we need to do is to become people of compassion. In other words, says the Ramban, the philosophy behind this mitzvah is that we get instilled with the midah, with the character trait of compassion, that we should be transformed by it. And with that, the Ramban launches into an entire philosophy of mitzvahs, which he says, it's not about what the mitzvah can do for Hashem. Because Hashem, he says, does not need our mitzvahs. Hashem does not need our mitzvahs. Of course, he has required us to do it, and we have to therefore obey Him, because He is our Father in heaven, and He redeemed us from Egypt, and He created us. And so therefore, we have a duty to obey His mitzvahs. But says the Ramban, it's not about what we can do for Hashem. He doesn't instruct us to do the mitzvahs because He needs something out of it. Hashem is above need. Hashem doesn't need us. We need Him. And so the Ramban goes into this question about then what is the purpose of mitzvahs. So he says it's not about what we can do for Hashem. It's about what we can do for ourselves through the mitzvahs. In other words, Hashem instructs us on the mitzvahs so that we can transform ourselves. The mitzvahs are essentially Hashem's tools to us of self-transformation. And so the mitzvah Shiluach HaKain is about transforming ourselves into people of compassion. And then he has a look, he says, let's look at Shabbos and the Yom Tovim. These are mitzvahs which are on the surface seem to be about testifying to certain basic truths. That Shabbos is about testifying to the truth that God created the world, Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. It is, Pesach reminds us of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, and Shavuos about the divine revelation on Mount Sinai, and Sukkot, how Hashem looked after us in the desert. But he says, it's not that Hashem needs us to know or recognize the fact that He created the world, or took us out of Egypt, or gave us the Torah, or looked after us in the desert. He doesn't need our recognition. I mean, we know even our sages tell us that we should not be seeking the recognition of other people, even for ourselves, that we need to somehow transcend the need for people's praise and honor and acknowledgement. So that's the ultimate. It's not an easy level to achieve, but that's what we strive for in our lives. But Hashem is certainly above the need for our recognition. And part of the way that the Balei HaMusar explain that we can rise above the need for kavod, for the acknowledgement of others, is to realize what is that kavod worth at the end of the day, so that human beings of flesh and blood, mere mortals, think better of you. Is that what we are striving for in life? Is that the purpose of our lives? Is that what we want? So if it's not meaningful to us on a rational level, how much more so it's not meaningful to Hashem? Why would Hashem need our acknowledgement, our praise, our acknowledgement that He took us out of Egypt, or that He created the world, or gave us the Torah, looked after us in the desert? He doesn't need it, but we need it. We need it in order to become people of emunah, people of faith, people of bitachon, of trust in Hashem, people who know that the Torah comes from heaven, people who know that Hashem looks after us, people who know that Hashem created the world. That we need to become people like that. That is what is so important and so crucial to us, that we can become the right kind of people. So that he says, if you look at the sum total of the mitzvahs are about crafting and molding and shaping us into people of greatness, into people of compassion and faith and trust and knowledge and wisdom, and people of humility and gratitude and kindness and compassion. We need that. We need to be transformed. And the mitzvahs are the paths to achieve that. The mitzvahs guide us on achieving that, and can be paths for self-transformation where we are completely transformed. And he quotes as the source and the basis for this entire approach to mitzvahs, he quotes from the Midrash, where the Midrash says that lo nitnu ha-mitzvahs ela letzaref sabrias, that the mitzvahs were only given in order to purify people, that we need to be purified, and we are purified through the actions of the mitzvahs, and that the mitzvahs are not for what we can do for Hashem, but what we can do for ourselves, that Hashem wants us to become better people, to become people of greatness, and kindness and compassion and refinement and sensitivity and humility and people of faith. That is what Hashem wants from us. How do we achieve that? He gives us the mitzvahs as the tools. And that is the Ramban's philosophy. And it's interesting that the Sefer HaChinuch, arguably the most famous and fundamental book of Tameh HaMitzvahs, of reasons for the mitzvahs, adopts the philosophy of the Ramban. The book, the Sefer HaChinuch, was published anonymously, and yet, in spite of that fact that it was published anonymously, is indeed a fundamental work from the time of the Rishonim. In fact, the Sefer HaChinuch, there's discussion and debate as to who he was, but he certainly learnt from students of the Ramban, it seems. And there's a direct connection in terms of tradition and teaching from the Ramban directly to the Sefer HaChinuch. Either way, be that as it may, whether that speculation is true or not, or correct historically, what is very clear is that the Sefer HaChinuch adopts the philosophy of the Ramban whole scale for mitzvahs. And if you look at the Sefer HaChinuch in Parshas Kiseitze, this parsha that we read yesterday, you will see that on the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKain, he writes out virtually the entirety of the Ramban. And if you look carefully through the mitzvahs, you will see that the Sefer HaChinuch is looking all the time to see how mitzvahs can transform us. And this completely turns on its head our whole approach to the concept of Tameh HaMitzvahs, of the reasons for mitzvahs. Because what we need to ask ourselves is this when it comes to mitzvahs: not why did Hashem instruct the specific mitzvah, because that is a question that we can never truly answer in its fundamental sense. How do we get into the mind of Hashem? Hashem is above us. We can never penetrate that. And therefore, in a certain sense, the pursuit of Tameh HaMitzvahs, of reasons for mitzvahs, is futile. And yet, the great Rishonim, in fact, all do that. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim is full of the Tameh HaMitzvahs. The Ramban often writes, Rabbeinu B'chaya, the Sefer HaChinuch. It's all over in the writings of our great sages, this approach to mitzvahs. And what we see from there, that it is legitimate to probe. So if it is indeed legitimate to probe into the mitzvahs, how do we rationally, intellectually defend that? If we can't know the ultimate motivations of Hashem, how can we probe the mitzvahs? And so therefore we have to divide our discussion into two levels. On the level of asking the question, why did Hashem instruct on this particular mitzvah? For that we have to humbly bow our heads and know that we cannot. We cannot answer that question. On the other hand, the question that we need to ask ourselves is not why did Hashem command this, but rather what opportunity for self-growth and self-transformation is offered by this mitzvah that Hashem has instructed us upon, and then to use the mitzvah to become a better person. Because that is the will of Hashem. And how do we know that is the will of Hashem? Because that's what the Midrash says, and that's what the Ramban says, and that's what the Sefer HaChinuch says. We have an entire Masorah, we have an entire tradition of how to approach this. Not something that we've invented ourselves. It's an entire approach. And what that does is this: it changes our whole way of looking at Torah and mitzvahs. What we need to be asking ourselves is this: are we being transformed through our Shmiras HaMitzvahs? Meaning, is the keeping of mitzvahs something which is external and peripheral to who we are, or is it transformational and internal and changes who we are? Are we, in other words, are we fundamentally people whose outlook and personalities and character traits and a whole way of looking at the world is molded by the Torah? Or are the mitzvahs that we do and the halacha that we keep, is that something external to who we are? Or is it fundamental and internal and personally transformative? And it needs to be. It needs to be that approach where we are Torah people in our essence, in our character, in our way of thinking, at the very heart and the soul of who we are. Torah people, we need to be people who are transformed by it. And so that is the journey. And so when I say, when we're preparing for Rosh Hashanah, what we need to be asking ourselves, and this is particularly when it comes to the mitzvah of tshuva, if there's ever a mitzvah which is all about personal transformation, it is certainly the mitzvah of tshuva, which is a deep and internal, powerful, transformative experience. In fact, Rav Soloveitchik explains that there are certain mitzvahs which which by definition, in terms of their halachic definition, have two components, the external and the internal. There is, for example, he explains that the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema is a mitzvah which is externally fulfilled through the saying of the words of the Shema, but internally it's fulfilled through Kabbalas Omelchus Shemayim, to accept the yoke of heaven. This is the mitzvah of Tefillah, is externally fulfilled through the words of the Siddur, but it's internally fulfilled as the Avodah Shebelev, the emotional service of the heart. And the mitzvah of Aveilus is externally fulfilled through the minhagim, through the customs of mourning, and it is internally fulfilled through the process of emotional mourning for the loss of a loved one. And tshuva, he says, is such a mitzvah. It is externally fulfilled through the confessions that we go through, but it is internally fulfilled through an internal process of real change that transforms the essence of us. So he gives those examples. But if we were to expand, if we are to take the Ramban to his logical conclusion, the truth is the Ramban would say that about every mitzvah, that there is the external component and then there is the internal transformative component, which should really change us. The mitzvah of Shabbos is not about just fulfilling the mitzvah of Shabbos. It is about a deep transformational experience in Shabbos. The mitzvah of Pesach, the mitzvah of Tefillin, the mitzvah of davening, whatever it may be, is there to transform and to change us fundamentally, internally, in the deepest possible way. And so when we are thinking about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Yomim Noraim, what we need to be thinking is not about only, of course, the externalities are important, and the diktuk ha-mitzvahs and the detail and the fulfillment of the mitzvahs is vitally important. But what we need to be asking ourselves is more crucially is not just about going through the motions of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the motions of tshuva, but how that can be a truly personal transformative experience where we are changed in that process. And we therefore need to think and ask ourselves this question at the end of this season of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Yomim Noraim, will we be the same people, but maybe doing one or two extra things, or will we be different people on a deeper, higher spiritual level than we were before? That is the crucial question that we need to ask ourselves, and one which we need to be asking ourselves all the time. Is our learning of Torah something which becomes a distant intellectual experience, or is it a personal transformative experience where we are molded and changed by the ideas of Hashem as revealed to us in his Torah, and that we can say about absolutely every mitzvah that we go through. And so what I would say is this: if we are to live with this philosophy of the Ramban, then that will mean that what we need to think about over this Yomim Noraim is to think how in the year ahead can we transform our Torah and mitzvahs from something which is external to something which is deeply, deeply internal and deeply, deeply personally transformative in the deepest sense of the word. How can we mold and create ourselves? And this is how the Maharal explains when in Tiferes Yisrael, when he talks about the mitzvahs, he says the purpose of the mitzvahs is to bring us to a level of completion. He continues in this path of the Ramban, and he shows how mitzvahs are there to complete us and to transform us and to uplift us. He looks at it more from a spiritual dynamics point of view, but in its entirety as well. And the Maharal explains in Tiferes Yisrael about the difference between the Aseres HaDibros and the rest of the mitzvahs. He says the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 commandments, frame the relationship with Hashem, and the rest of the mitzvahs continue that journey of personal transformation. And so we are there to transform and to change ourselves and to make ourselves into better people. That is the journey of what we are talking about. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today, this philosophy of the Ramban and the Sefer HaChinuch, and it is applied by the Maharal as well. And it is a philosophy which has deep roots in the sources of our sages, and at the same time is something which can be intensely practical and real for us, and something to give a renewed focus for the days of introspection which lie ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Goldstein, for sharing these words of Torah, for taking all of this time out of your schedule to meet with us. I want to just ask one follow-up question, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I think it really resonates, your idea that we're supposed to be molded by the Torah and to bring these ideas into the high holiday season with us. I was wondering if we could ask a little bit about how you applied in your profession as the chief rabbi. So I don't expect you to comment on what goes on in America because I'm sure that's not within your purview. But in America, we're thinking a lot these days about how to apply our Jewish values to who we select to lead our nation, how we choose our values to advocate for different policies. So we could see from your biography that you had the traditional yeshiva training of any Talmud Chacham, of any rabbinic scholar, but also you take that rabbinic training and you apply it to interfaith. I looked up a few organizations that you're involved in: Enriching Tomorrow, Sharing Ideas for the Future, and National Religious Leaders Forum. So I was wondering if you could speak more to us about what your position is like and how you bring these Torah ideas and values to the interfaith and to the South African people on a day-to-day basis.
What I think it's rooted in, and it's obviously it's a long discussion, but just to share with you a principle which guides me in everything. And it's a sentence which I heard from one of the great American Rabbonim of the 20th century, Rav Mordechai Pinchas Teitz of Elizabeth, New Jersey. And he used to say this. He used to say, the Torah speaks in the language of tomorrow. And that phrase, I read it many years ago, but as soon as I heard it, I knew that's it. It captures so much in such a short sentence, because we know that the Torah is the blueprint of the world. The Midrash says Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Hafoich ba v'hafoich ba dekol ba, turn it over and over, for everything is in it. And the Torah was given to us by Hashem for all times and for all places. And what Rabbi Teitz explains is that sometimes when there's something in Torah we don't understand, it's not because Chas v'Sholom we're ahead of the Torah, but it's the other way around. The Torah is ahead of us. We haven't caught up to that understanding. And this was the focus of my PhD work in constitutional and human rights, looking at the concept of a Bill of Rights and a constitution and a supreme judicial authority, and what that means, and how the Torah laid the foundations, the conceptual foundations for things that the Western world today takes for granted. And so what I think needs to be embraced is the fact that the Torah has a very broad view of the world, meaning all of what happens in the world is contained in the Torah. We need to look at everything that is happening around us through the prism of our Torah values. We cannot live life compartmentalized, in which it says that we are Jews inside our shuls and in our community halls, but as soon as we get out into the outside world, then we leave that behind. We need to be Torah Jews in every part of who we are, and to realize the Torah has a message for us in whatever space that we're in, whether we're at work or in society, whether we're engaging with people of other faiths, whether we are engaging with Jews who come from different backgrounds. We need to realize the Torah has a relevant and dynamic message for every situation of life, and that we have to carry that with us, and we cannot be compartmentalized. It's an idea like that I saw also in the writings, very similar, from Rav Yitzchak Hutner, where he writes in a letter to a doctor who was saying to him, the doctor wrote him, was a Ben Torah, and the doctor writes to him and he says, I feel like I'm living a double life. And Rav Hutner responds and he says, he says, look, if you're living at home and you also got a hotel room, then you're living a double life. But he says, if you're living at home and you've got a house and you've got one roof and you add another room, then your house, you're not living in two houses. You're living under one roof as part of one house. And so he says, as a Ben Torah, as a doctor, and you're healing people, he said that is part of an extension. You need to see it as an extension of your service of Hashem, that you're doing this incredible mitzvah of healing and chesed. And so therefore he said, you're not living a double life, you're living a broad life. And that, he says, is what echad, why we say Hashem echad, Hashem is one. And that means that Hashem covers everything and the Torah covers everything. It is the broad range of Torah, and we need to put our whole lives inside. Whatever we're involved in, we need to see it as certainly to be in accordance with Shulchan Aruch. We know Shulchan Aruch covers Choshen Mishpat and monetary ethics, and it covers interpersonal ethics, and it covers all of these different realms. But it's also to realize that too is part of our avodas Hashem. That is also how we serve Hashem, is how we interact and make a contribution in society. And whether we're a Kiddush Hashem and we spread the name of Torah far and wide in lights, and with, spread the name of Klal Yisrael in a positive way, that too is part of our Avodas Hashem. And those are the principles that I've tried to bring. And so in my work, it's not only in interfaith, but it's in dealing with government and standing up for the state of Israel and fighting BDS, in also dealing with issues of crime and spreading moral regeneration in South Africa, and engaging in debates around racism and corruption and all the different issues which are hotly debated in the context of South Africa, which is a vibrant and robust and open democracy. Playing a role in that, I do so from the perspective of Torah values, and I carry those Torah values with me, and it's in accordance with what Rav Mordechai Pinchas Tait says: the Torah speaks in the language of tomorrow. Every answer we need is in the Torah, and we can carry the light of Torah with us in everything that we do.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldstein. Just one more question, if you have a moment.
Yes.
Okay. So I think it's very beautiful, and it sounds like there's a lot of initiatives, like you mentioned, that you're working on inside South Africa. Can you tell us what kind of progress has been made over recent years for the Jewish community, and what kind of lessons, what could we learn in America from the work that's being done in your community in South Africa?
Okay, it's a nice question to end our discussion on, and thank you so much for the opportunity of spending this time with you and your community. And that is, the South African Jewish community, Baruch Hashem, is very vibrant and proud of its Jewishness. It's also a community which is very unified, and there's a sense of connecting with Jews of all backgrounds and levels of Yiddishkeit. One thing that has come out of South Africa and that has spread all around the world, and maybe it's a beautiful thing to end our discussion on, and that is the Shabbos Project, which I'm sure you all know of. It's coming up in Pashas Vayera, and it's Pashas Vayera. It's an opportunity for the message to go around to all of Klal Yisrael, to keep that one Shabbos. And I wanted to say to a community such as yours, I would love you to be my partners in this, and to spread the message of the Shabbos Project in the tri-state area. Reach out to as many people that you know who would love to, because my experience has been this, that Shabbos has a compelling message for our times, that people are thirsting for it, the connection with family, with tranquility, but also with faith. Shabbos is not just only about quality of life, it's also about faith and emunah. It is about Jewish identity. It's about family quality time. It's about everything. If there's one mitzvah that can properly transform all of Klal Yisrael, it is Shabbos. It's, as the Gemara says, that Shabbos has the power of Geula, and Geula really is transformation. It changes who we are and changes the very essence. Shabbos can change. We were talking earlier about transformation. Shabbos is indeed the mitzvah that can give the most powerful form of transformation. And so Shabbos Project, when it started in South Africa in 2013, is now spread to more than 1,500 cities in 100 countries around the world, across all of the different languages. We have 6,000 volunteers on the ground across the world. And I wanted to say that I would love your shul, your community, to partner with me on this, to spread the word in the tri-state, to get out, to reach out to people, to form learning groups, help people to prepare, to keep Shabbos of Pashas Vayera, and to be an energy. This year, the theme of the Shabbos Project is moving away from all of the big events, because obviously with COVID and all of the dangers around that. So the whole focus this year is Shabbos, bring it home. It's the time to bring it home and really to celebrate that. So I would love you to be my partners, and maybe Rabbi, you could be in contact with me on email, and we can see how to deepen that partnership, and I can link you with my team. And so it's a lovely note to end on. So thank you so much to all of you. I really enjoyed the time with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Rabbi Goldstein, for making the time to be with us this morning. Thank you, Daniel Schillis, for putting this together, and for everyone who came here to join and listen to words of Torah in preparation for the high holidays. Thank you for your time, Chief Rabbi.
Thank you.